Israel has no better friend than America, and America has no better friend than Israel.
American ground forces training with an IDF armored division.
And we will never, ever, ever abandon Israel.
Why does the United States support Israel? Well, there's a history, and a very interesting one, that actually goes back a long time.
Israel, a small state in the Middle East, returned to the map on May 14, 1948. Initially, its territory looked as you now see it. However, over time, as a result of taking over lands formerly belonging to Palestine, Israel significantly expanded its territory. It is noteworthy that at the time when the country was created on the basis of 181 United Nations resolutions, its population was 850,000 inhabitants, who were almost exclusively Jewish. Those who had previously lived in the area were displaced.
The resolution of the DAC Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
And this was the scene next day in Jerusalem. The Jewish people at once began to celebrate the United Nations decision. If they hadn't got all they wanted, they had at least gained the verdict for the setting up of a new Jewish state, and their rejoicing was obviously a spontaneous affair.
To be exact, a little more than 800,000 people were expelled from their properties to end up in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, neighboring Arab countries, and other countries around the world. At the time, the population advantage of Arab countries over Israelis was enormous and was roughly 1 in 10, just taking into account the neighbors. Because counting the entire diaspora in the Middle East and Africa, the estimate was close to 1 Jew for every 40 Arabs. As you probably know, the Arab world was not only unhappy with the appearance of Israel there, but also decided to wipe it out after some time, even from the map. This was the case many times during the Zion Arab Wars, which were always supported by the US government. During the 1964 Six-Day War involving Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq, Israel not only repulsed the Arabs despite their superiority, but even conquered Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, which was only returned after time, on top of which it expanded its territory to include Syria's Golan Heights. These claims were accepted by the US. Since 1973, Israel has received more than $120 billion in aid, including 3 special aid packages from the United States alone. Before that, there were regular deliveries of weapons and funds, the value of which is difficult to add up. In 1999, the U.S. government signed a memorandum of understanding pledging to provide Israel with at least $2.67 billion in military aid annually for the next 10 years. In 2009, the annual amount was raised to $3 billion, and in 2019, the amount was raised again, now at a minimum of $3.6 billion.
All these efforts will strengthen the bonds between our two democracies. They will help us to build a better future together. I am proud that Prime Minister Barak is my partner in this work.
Atmosphere of deep friendship and understanding. Israel and America share a unique friendship and a very special partnership. Our relationship is built upon common values, shared interests, and a mutual vision as to the future of the region. A strong Israeli-American relationship must be the cornerstone on which to build a peaceful Middle East.
In total, therefore, it can be surmised that the Americans may have spent anywhere from $200 billion to as much as $1 trillion in support of Israel. Although these are only official figures, they may not be much less than the cost of the U.S. war in Iraq. Today, Israel is the 13th richest country in the world per capita. The Jewish community has influence on the world's major funds, such as the powerful BlackRock, which almost controls the stock market. According to rankings, it's also the 15th country with the world's strongest army, with a population of just over 9 million people. That's why in today's video, we decided to check for you the reasons why Americans so eagerly support Israel, how much geopolitical influence this small country has in the world, and whether the US might soon turn its back on Tel Aviv. Let's find out. I invite you to watch the video.
And we will never, ever, ever abandon Israel out of our own self-interest.
You don't have to be an eminent expert to see that Israel's existence was made possible mainly thanks to the United States. But nothing happens by chance, and there had to be an underlying important strategic goal in this plan. The Blackstone Memorial is a petition submitted to President Benjamin Harrison in 1891. It was signed by 431 prominent Americans, including J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, future President William McKinley, the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and many members of Congress. The petition was also signed by several prominent organizations, including the Washington Post and the New York Times. What was the urgent message contained in this star-filled manifesto for the American president? It was a plea for the return of the Jewish people to their historic homeland in the Middle East. This event marked the beginning of the Zionist movement and future thinking about implementing this plan. With the growing anti-Semitic movements in Europe, but especially in Russia, the West, even before the start of the First World War, was seriously examining the possibility of establishing Israel as a separate state in the Middle East, because it was a chance to maintain influence there in the long term and some control over the Arabs. The opportunity, of course, came as a result of the British-Ottoman War. Palestine became a British colony after London's victory. Already at that time, Jews were drawn to the area, and they formed the first agricultural communes and organizations there to seize power. At the time, however, the British did not plan to create a fully independent state of Israel there, only Palestine, whose rules were to be delineated by a white book. This area, which was a British protectorate, was to consist of half Jews and half Arabs. It was from this that Britain forbade Jews to evacuate to Palestine, even though 6 million Zionists in 1938 were stuck in Europe with the idea that at any moment Germany might do its worst. Well, unfortunately, they were right. After the war, the Jews took up arms against the British, wanting to create their own country. They rebelled against the Europeans, but were willing to talk to the Americans, who also eagerly supported them. Between 1947 and 1948, a civil war broke out on the land of Palestine between the Israelis, Arabs, and in part, the British. Eventually, the United Nations General Assembly decided to create Israel there on May 14, 1948. Immediately after the declaration of the new state, both leaders of the superpowers, U.S. President Harry S. Truman and USSR leader Joseph Stalin, recognized the new state. Britain did not want to supply weapons to the Jews. However, both the Americans and the Soviets did, as both wanted to gain influence in the Middle East. In the end, however, the Americans played a greater role in this, and Israeli-Soviet relations deteriorated considerably in 1952 because of a so-called conspiracy of Jewish doctors of Jewish origin to poison Stalin.
But don't think that decision to recognize Israel was an easy one. I had to make a compromise with the Arabs and divide Palestine. The Jews wanted to chase all the Arabs into the Tigris and Euphrates River, and the Arabs wanted to chase all the Jews into the Red Sea. And what I was trying to do was to find a homeland for the Jews and still be just with the Arabs.
The question now is, why were the Americans, for the sake of the creation of the State of Israel, ready to partially sacrifice their diplomatic relations with Britain, spend hundreds of billions of dollars on the country, and risk conflict with the Arab world, from which they drew vitally needed oil and gas for industrial development? So much so that they even came to terms with the crisis caused by the soaring price of oil on world markets as a result of the embargo Arab states imposed on the United States after the outbreak of the Israeli-Arab War in October 1973. Washington's unwavering support for Israel is rooted in the aftermath of World War II, the Cold War, pro-Israel political influence, and PR outlays. Here one can see how American attitudes towards Israel's actions in Gaza and Palestine have changed over time. The Middle East, with its oil reserves and strategic waterways, that is, the Suez Canal, for example, was a key battleground for superpower hegemonic influence. The United States took over as the main Western energy intermediary in the Middle East after the severely weakened European powers. The Americans needed an ally that would give them the ability to control what happened in the region. The United States used its position as a member of the UN Security Council to veto 42 resolutions that could have affected Israel and condemned its actions in Gaza or Palestine.
The fact that this veto is being done in defense of American sovereignty and in defense of America's role in the Middle East peace process is not a source of embarrassment for us. It should be an embarrassment to the remainder of the Security Council. The United States will not be told by any country where we can put our embassy.
The two nations have also traditionally shared intelligence. Tel Aviv is also one of the countries that has historically bought the most American equipment. According to the Statistica portal, Israel ranks 11th on this list. The geography of the country is also very important. It is even said that conquering it is almost impossible, and there is a lot of truth in this. To the east, it is separated from the Arab world by the Dead Sea, which is an effective water barrier to any land action. In the next line stretches the central highland mountainous region of the Galilee. Israel, on the other hand, is crossed from the east by several rivers, which makes it impossible to attack from both the north and the south, which is additionally a difficult desert mountainous terrain. The low-lying valleys, on the other hand, provide an ideal place for agriculture and development, which was also considered strategically because, as a place to conduct military operations in the Middle East, Israel is downright perfect, and this is reflected in the railroads of strategic plaintiffs. Foremost among them is Israel, which has held Syria for many years, an ally of the Soviet Union, and now Russia. Without Israel, American operations in the region could be severely limited. Israel's frequent wars with its neighbors have been battlefield tests of American weapons, often against Soviet weapons. Above all, Israel's Iron Dome, which was even tested by U.S. Marines in 2022, also plays a key role. Israel's experience and perfect geography allowed the Americans to build their military power. In part, Israel also served as a conduit for American arms to regimes and movements not very popular in the United States. Thus, in order not to openly provide direct military aid, Israel transferred arms as well as support to apartheid South Africa, the Islamic Republic in Iran, the military junta in Guatemala, and the Nicaraguan Contras. Israeli military advisors assisted the Contras, the Salvadoran junta, and foreign occupation forces in Namibia and Western Sahara. Thus, Israel has gone from being a poor little country to one of the world's most rapidly growing economies, which may soon even be among the top 10 richest nations. But this is also influenced by the Jewish diaspora, which is exceptionally numerous and extremely wealthy in the world. After all, we are talking about 16 million people who identify themselves as Jewish. In the United States alone, that's as many as 6 million people, often bankers and holders of gigantic fortunes. Only about 25% of the richest Americans on the Forbes list are Jewish. Jews make up 2% of the American population and control about $4 trillion in wealth. We are talking here only about the Jewish community in America. This probably shows quite clearly the scale of capital they have and how much they say they have in global corporations. This is precisely why American and Jewish influences often clash, making Israel extremely important to the United States. Leading American politicians, no matter whether they were Democrats or Republicans, had one thing in common: they have always supported Israel. You don't have to look far for examples. Today, despite the risk of a significant deterioration of democracy after Prime Minister Netanyahu's reform and the Israeli take to the streets, Joe Biden continues to support Tel Aviv. And Donald Trump, despite criticism from the Arab world, has moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, partially recognizing it as the real capital of the State of Israel.
My announcement today marks the beginning of a new approach to conflict between Israel and the government, to relocate the American embassy to Jerusalem and to recognize that that city, and so importantly, is Israel's capital.
Nonetheless, the next few years will be a test for U.S.-Israeli relations, as the country's democratization index is declining, despite the fact that it is still, for Americans, the only democracy in the Middle East. I think the Israelis themselves have some objections to this slogan, but I sincerely doubt that U.S.-Israeli relations are in any way threatened. These countries need and benefit from each other, which is why this informal alliance will probably last for the proverbial ages. Let me know what you think about this. From my side, that's it for today. Stay tuned. Thanks until the next video. Bye.